All right. Back again for, I don't know if this is like day 6, day 7 live stream. What is it? Oh, day 7. Let me pull up the content so we can get started. Hope everyone's doing well. If you are tuning in, let me start sharing. Oh, before I share my screen, let me actually turn on some music so we can listen to a little bit of music as we study. Okay, cool. I think we are ready to get started. Listen to audio sounds good. Cool. All right. Today's gonna be the last live stream. The test is on Monday. I will probably not be streaming on Saturday and Sunday, even though I'll probably use both days in its entirety to continue studying. And I'll probably do some more content that is not like these live study sessions, but maybe more like very succinct teaching sessions that I'll do at some point afterwards, because there's just too much content to go through and I really need to just sit down and focus and study. So today's probably going to be the last live stream for a little while until I do something else. But anyways, we'll jump right into it. Last time we finished the medications module. Today we have an hour. I will go through the workflow module and then the clinical reasoning. These look very similar actually. But yeah, we'll try to get through these two, workflow and clinical reasoning today. Maybe we can get through terminology. I think that would be the stretch goal. We'll try to get through 3 modules if we can. Otherwise, workflow and clinical reasoning will be the actually, no, I take that back. Workflow and terminology should be the 2, because I know terminology, it's like 5% of the exam. And then workflow will definitely have some part of the exam. And I think clinical reasoning is lower on the likelihood of being on the exam. So let's start with workflow first, and then we'll get started. So, all right. The workflow module focuses on the coordination of activities within and across systems. This includes 3 aspects. How do we ask for another person, device, or system to do something? How do we track the linkages and dependencies between activities, actions to their authorizations, complex activities to individual steps, protocols, plans to orders, etc.? How do we define what activities are possible and the expected order and dependencies of the steps within those activities, i.e. process orchestration definition? Is this the way they're organizing their resources in this index? This is kind of interesting. Maybe I'll just read this introduction here too. Workflows can be performed through direct posting of resources to a target server, combined with a specific tag by using the task resource, through the use of messaging or via FHIR services. This specification includes a workflow page that describes the concepts underlying the discussion of workflows and points to a number of different communication and architectural workflow patterns. In addition to the task resource, this specification defines 3 logical models: definition, request, and event, that defines the patterns for resources that are typically involved in workflow. These patterns include elements defining common attributes of each type of resource, as well as relationships between them. These relationships are summarized in the workflow page, along with the list of resources that follow or are hoped to soon follow the request and event patterns. Finally, the plan definition and activity definition resources combine to support the creation of protocols, order sets, guidelines, and other workflow definitions by describing the types of activities that can occur and setting rules about their composition, sequencing, interdependencies, and flow. Concrete example here is like creating a lab order, drug prescription, or other clinical order, or an insurance claim, enrollment request, appointment, or similar administrative requests, and asking for it to be actioned by a specific organization or practitioner. Okay, I think we got this. Let's jump into each of these resources, which, I mean, they give you a start here. So I'm going to start here. These aren't resources, though. This module is organized a little interesting. Maybe we'll just read through all of these. It's probably a good idea. All right. So workflow overview. There's, oh my goodness, there is a lot. All right. I don't think I'm actually going to. This is a lot. Some of these looks like we did read through already, though. I'll read through this page, and then we can go through each of the resources. Some of the resources. I don't know if we can get through all of them. Let's just start. Workflow is an essential part of healthcare. Orders, care protocols, referrals are the drivers of most activity within inpatient settings and a great deal of activity in community care as well. FHIR is concerned with workflow when there's a need to share information about workflow state or relationships, when there's a need to coordinate or drive the execution of workflow across systems, and when there's a need to define allowed actions, dependencies, and conditions on behavior. Workflow state and relationships. FHIR does not need to be used for the execution of workflow. Orders, care plans, lab results, hospital admissions, claim payments, and other records can all be shared using FHIR resources without the process to solicit fulfillment of those orders or requesting payment of those claims being driven by a FHIR transaction. Interoperable support for workflow execution is a more advanced FHIR activity because it requires a higher degree of standardization. Rather than merely standardizing the data to exchange, interoperable workflow execution requires standardization of the processes, roles and activities across the different systems. However, even without using FHIR for workflow execution, there's still a need to standardize the data elements related to workflow. How does an event or a result point to the order that authorizes it? How do parent steps and child steps get linked together? How does a care plan identify what protocol it's adhering to? FHIR defines 3 categories of resources that are involved in activities: requests, events, and definitions. Each of these categories has a pattern associated with it. Resources that fall into that category are encouraged to adhere to their respective pattern. These patterns provide standard elements that are typical for most resources for each category. Strict adherence is not required, as work groups are expected to align with typical behavior and requirements as more authoritative than desired architectural patterns. In some cases, capabilities might be supported with extensions rather than core elements, where a pattern capability is deemed to be not common but still relevant for a given resource. A full description of their patterns and their interrelationships can be found in the Workflow Resource Patterns section of this page. Workflow execution. In addition to defining patterns for resources used in workflow processes, FHIR supports the execution of those processes as well. However, FHIR does not define a one-size-fits-all solution for workflow architecture. FHIR supports a variety of interoperability paradigms, and most of them, REST, messaging, and services, provide support for driving workflow execution. The document paradigm does not directly support driving behavior, though it can be combined with one of the other patterns to do so. In addition, several of these paradigms allow multiple approaches to supporting workflow, depending on the context and needs of the workflow process. The Workflow Execution and Communications Pattern section describes many workflows for workflow execution, summarizing the respective pros and cons, and makes recommendations for the circumstances for which they may best be used. Workflow definition. The definition of protocols, order sets, guidelines, and other structures that define what sorts of activities should occur, what order they should occur on, what dependencies they have, in what circumstances they should start or end, is handled by a pair of resources. Plan definition defines the relationships of steps and rules around their execution. Activity definition defines an activity to be performed in a single step. The use of these 2 artifacts is discussed here. Workflow resource patterns. Not all resources in FHIR are related to workflow. Many are used to describe the entities and roles patients, medications, or infrastructure. Structure definitions, value sets. However, a large proportion of the FHIR resources are devoted to the description of activities in one fashion or another, and almost all of these fall into the realm of workflow. They describe things that can be done, definitions, are desired to be done, requests, or that have been done, events. This table summarizes the list of workflow relevant resources. Resources that define this could potentially happen. So definition. So there's a variety of definition resources, activity definition, operation definition. I've never actually seen this one. Plan definition, questionnaire, and measure. And in requests, resources that ask for or express a desire or intention for something to be done. Appointment response, care plans, claims, communication requests, contract coverage eligibility requests, device requests, enrollment requests, immunization recommendation, medication requests, nutrition order, service requests, tasks, supply requests, and vision prescription, and specific events. The appointment, and actually this is a lot to read through. I think, going back to the purposes of the test, I'm just going to pick and choose some of the ones that I'm maybe more biased in reading. So I'm just going to go and click on some of these. So let's go through activity definition. So activity definition, this resource allows for the definition of some activity to be performed independent of a particular patient, practitioner, or other performance context. This resource is a definition resource. An activity definition is a shareable, consumable description of some activity to be performed. It may be used to specify actions to be taken as part of a workflow, order set, or protocol, or it may be used independently as part of a catalog of activities, such as orderables. For more information on how activity definitions can be used to construct request resources, see the applying activity definition topic below. Boundaries and relationships. In general, an activity definition is simply a conceptual description of some specific action that should be taken. An instance of an activity definition does not indicate that any action has been performed, nor does it indicate the actual intent to carry out any particular action, as a request resource does. Instead, an activity definition provides a reusable template that can be used to construct specific request resources, such as a service request and medication requests. Note that this is conceptually similar to the task resource as well, with the distinction being that activity definition represents the description of a task in the abstract, while the task resource is used to track a specific instance of a task as it moves through the steps of a workflow. It's interesting because I've done a lot of work in this area a bit more, and it's so abstractly described here that I feel like it can be quite dry. Just because this is an area that I'm worked in a little bit more. This is a very fascinating area for people who are clinical, because the way you look at activity definition, if you've worked with order sets, like building order sets in Epic or Cerner, or other power plans in Cerner, the activity definition is just what it is. It's a very abstract way of describing something to be done. So it's you're prescribing lisinopril, you are ordering a CBC, you are ordering a chest x-ray or something. That's an activity definition would describe that. And it's a abstract thing that you can reuse each time. And you plug that into a plan definition that I'm assuming we're going to read about later. And the plan definition, you can define the conditions of when those things can be done. So truly like an order set, but super fun. Activity definition and plan definition are pretty fun parts of FHIR, because you can start creating the clinical knowledge and represent it in a really fun way. We have a question. Hey, Carrie. Thanks for tuning in. Carrie says, what are some sample questions they may ask? That's a great question. So there's two exams, by the way, for FHIR, and I'm taking both of them. The first one is the FHIR R4 exam. Since I'm like on the topic, I'll show you what I mean. FHIR proficiency. This is the FHIR certification. It's been around for a while. It is on the R4. This is being retired at the end of the year in December 2024. This is just on just knowing the FHIR standard. And they ask questions very abstractly. It's rather a conceptual questions that they ask. And it would be things like, a question could be I think like 60 or 70% of the test is on resources, and they ask you. The reason why I'm doing this exercise of reading through every resource is because they will likely ask you questions about, if I need a resource that defines an activity to be performed independent of a particular patient, practitioner, or other performance context, what resource would it be? So you should be familiar with all the different types of resources and how they may be used. So the recommendation was to read the content and the scope and usage for every resource in FHIR to answer those type of questions. Would you group it as a drug class? Oops, I should share the question. Would you group it as a drug class? You certainly can. I think so. It's up to the people who implement. Same exact thing. The way to think about this is that FHIR is meant more like a exchange mechanism. It's not necessarily meant to they're not prescriptive in how you define the semantics. So an ACE inhibitor would be a more semantic way of representing things. Think about building order sets. You can choose to say, let's recommend an ACE, or let's recommend specifically lisinopril. It's up to the people who are implementing it to define those semantics. FHIR doesn't define that for you. It's up to people who are implementing it to define it. Hey, Roman. FHI activity definition is archimate.function. I don't think I understand what that means, but that seems pretty cool. Archimate.function. Cool, very cool. I was watching some YouTube videos. I also asked a fellow MD friend on LinkedIn about HL7. He said it is like inserting 30 pages into a 10,000 pages book. I'm not sure. I don't understand what that means. Inserting 30 pages into a $10,000 pages book. I don't know what the context of that means. I think the first thing that comes top of mind is like, FHIR is really cool. A lot of people are adopting it worldwide at a very fast rate, but the use cases and the ways we are using FHIR is certainly very far from taking full advantage of it. And I feel like that's how I would interpret this, like inserting 30 pages into a 10,000 page book. There's a lot of pages to fill up. Anyways, okay, let's keep going. Activity definition. I'm going to read the operation definition next. So operation definition, a formal computable definition of an operation on the RESTful interface or a named query using the search interaction. Scope and usage. The operation definition resource provides a formal computable definition of an operation or a named query. The operation definition serves two principal purposes: to allow for automatic determination of system compatibility, to allow for dynamic generation of forms to drive the operations. Let's see. Boundaries and relationships. Operation definitions are published to define operations that servers can implement in a common fashion. The FHIR specification itself describes some, see below, and other organizations, including IHE, national programs, jurisdictions, and vendors, are able to publish additional operation definitions. Operation definition resources are referred to from two different places: from a capability statement to declare what operations a system does or should implement, From another operation definition resource, this allows for a server to do limited implementation of a standard operation or to allow traceability if the server has to rename the operation due to a name clash. Oh, I see. Interoperability. I'm assuming that's HL7 in the context of FHIR, which I agree. There's just a lot more to do, but FHIR itself has certainly picked up a lot of traction. Okay, let's go to plan definition. So again, plan definition is like order sets for those who are in the order. I mean, they talk about it. The plan definition resource, this resource allows for the definition of various types of plans as shareable, consumable, and executable artifacts. The resource is general enough to support the description of a broad range of clinical and non-clinical artifacts, such as clinical decision support rules, order sets protocols, and drug quality specifications. A plan definition is a predefined group of actions to be taken in particular circumstances, often including conditional elements, options, and other decision points. The resource is flexible enough to be used to represent a variety of workflows, as well as clinical decision support and quality improvement assets, including order sets, protocols, and decision support rules. Plan definitions can contain hierarchical groups of action definitions, where each action definition describes an activity to be performed, often in terms of an activity definition resource. And each group defines additional behavior, relationships, and applicable conditions between the actions in the overall definition. In addition to describing what should take place, each action in a plan definition, each action can specify when and whether the action should take place. For when the action should be taken, the trigger element specifies the action should be taken in response to some trigger occurring, such as a particular point in a workflow being reached or as the result of a prescription being ordered. For when the action should be taken, the condition element can be used to provide an expression that evaluates to true or false to indicate the applicability of the action to the specific context. The process of applying a plan definition to a particular context typically produces request resources representing the actions that should be performed, typically grouped within a care plan and or request group to capture relationships between the resulting request resources. Plan definition is archimate.strategy.course of action. I feel like there's something here, but I don't know what it is. And I don't know if I'm saying that right. Archimate. Archimate seems like a pretty cool word. I'm just turning on the lights a little bit more. Okay. So this, like, just for visual, just because I think plan definitions are such a cool thing. It's like, think about a order set about hospital-acquired pneumonia. So if you wanted to create an order set, you can create a plan definition that represents an order set for hospital-acquired pneumonia. And then for triggers, plan definition has that data element for trigger. So you might trigger the order set, or rather the plan definition, when someone is placing an order for an antibiotic, and on their problem list or their condition, they have pneumonia. And so you might trigger this order set. And then for the condition, you might have different groups of actions. So kind of defined up here, right? Different groups. You might have different groups. And so you might have a group that is like hospital-acquired pneumonia, where they are at risk of Pseudomonas, versus one that's not. And then those two groups, how you determine that will probably be represented in a condition. And then you'll probably have different treatment options depending on those conditions. So it's a pretty fun resource to tinker with. Oh, what is this? I'll take a browse to see what that is. overview. Oh, this is like, oops. FHIR is written in Archimate, and then there's the website. See, very cool. This is actually one of the pages that are recommended readings for the HL7 FHIR proficiency exam. So it's on my list to read. I think I read it like 2 years ago. I need to come back and refresh my memory. But thanks for sharing that. Does it matter who is driving the care plan, MD, pharmacist, or nurse? I don't know if is that more like a rhetorical question? I think that it doesn't matter in the case, at least as long as there's someone driving it. I think that would be most important. Thanks for explaining that. Archimate is a technical framework for TOGAF, which TOGAF, I think I saw the TOGAF from a TOGAF perspective. Very interesting. I'm actually not very familiar with this. The TOGAF standard. There's literally a standard for everything. This is going to be a rabbit hole, so I'm not going to jump into this right now, but thanks for sharing. I'll probably read more about the TOGAF standard later on this weekend. Okay, let's continue on. Each activity definition is used to construct a specific resource based on the definition of the activity and combined with contextual information for the particular patient that the plan definition is being applied to. I'm going to turn on some lights real quick, 1 second. Okay. Hopefully I'm not too bright. As with the activity definition, a plan definition may provide information about how to transform the activity to a specific intent resource, either by specifying a structure map that can be used to perform the transformation completely, or by specifying values for specific elements of the resulting resource using dynamic value elements in the action. Note that these mechanisms are provided on both the activity definition and the plan definition to allow both reusable transformation descriptions as well as customization of those descriptions within specific contexts. As such, the transform descriptions specified in the plan definition override transform descriptions defined on the activity definition. Dynamic values within the definition can be provided by specifying the expression directly or by referencing an expression defined within a library. For more information on how to reference expressions within resources, refer to the Using Expressions topic. As an example, the low suicide risk example order set from the Clinical Decision Support Knowledge Artifacts specification can be represented using the plan definition and activity definition structures, low suicide risk example order set. In addition to the representation of plan definition, the apply operation allows plan definitions to be applied to a specific context, such as a patient, practitioner, or institution. For order set specifically, this operation is expected to place the orders defined by the order set consistent with the service functional requirements defined by the order set specification. Oh, we have more. That I am going to check out because I didn't see Archimate in the previous page that you had sent. An open and independent enterprise architectural modeling language to support the description, analysis, and visualization of architecture within and across business domains in an unambiguous way. Of course, it's from IEEE. Concepts in IEEE 1471. Hey, you have BPMNs in here. distinguishes itself from other languages by its enterprise modeling scope. Also, UML and BPMN are meant for specific use, and they are quite heavy, containing about 150 and 250 modeling concepts. Works with just 50. Is to be as small as possible, not to cover every edge scenario imaginable. That's interesting. This almost makes it sound like they are. It's an alternative to things like BPMN. By the way, this is I'm very much a fan of UML and BPMN for modeling different things. I've never heard of Archimate, but this is pretty fascinating. Thanks for sharing that. Okay. Let's move on from here. And let's go to questionnaire. Questionnaire is a structured set of questions intended to guide the collection of answers from end users. Questionnaires provide detailed control over the order, presentation, phraseology, and grouping to allow coherent, consistent data collection. A questionnaire is an organized collection of questions intended to solicit information from patients, providers, or other individuals involved in the healthcare domain. They may be simple flat lists of questions or can be hierarchical, organized in groups and subgroups, each containing questions. The questionnaire defines the questions to be asked, how they are ordered and grouped, any intervening instructional text, and what the constraints are on the allowed answers. The results of a questionnaire can be communicated using the questionnaire response resource. Questionnaires cover the need to communicate data originating from forms used in medical history examinations, research questionnaires, and sometimes full clinical specialty records. In many systems, this data is collected using user-defined screens and forms. Questionnaires define specifics about data capture, exactly what questions were asked, in what order, what choices for answers are, etc. Each of these questions is part of the questionnaire, and as such, the questionnaire is separately identifiable resource, whereas the individual questions are not. Questionnaire questions can be linked to shared data elements using the questionnaire item.definition element. Examples of questionnaires include past medical history, family diseases, social history, research questionnaires, clinical research forms or CRFs, quality and evaluation forms, patient intake forms, forms to support insurance claims. This resource is limited in scope to support the characteristics of simple questionnaires. However, common extensions have been defined to allow more sophisticated behavior. This includes questionnaire core extensions, which defines the additional descriptive characteristics of questionnaires and their groups and extensions. Element extensions, which can describe additional constraints on allowed answers for questionnaires such as string length. Oh, interesting. String length and date and numeric ranges. So you can now I'm kind of curious, what are some of the general extension for body site, calculated value, citation, a bibliographic citation for the related resource. This text should be formatted according to accepted citation format. Oh, this is super interesting. I did a lot of work where I looked into questionnaires quite a bit, and I don't think I was aware of the ability to further constrain specific elements for validation purposes. It makes sense. I just didn't realize that. That's really cool. Additional implementation guides, in particular, the structured data capture questionnaire provides guidance, extensions, and operations that support additional capabilities and allow the definition of more sophisticated questionnaires and the corresponding responses. In case you're kind of all curious too, is like I did a whole live stream of creating questionnaires, questionnaire responses, and also showing structured data capture in like a previous live stream. Super fun. Another reason why it's super fun is because you need structured data capture to parse out questions and answers from a questionnaire to do decision support if you wanted to do it on a form. So it's really good to know if you're interested in decision support. how do the staff know which order set to order? What if there are multiple? Is it pretty user-friendly? I I assume the question, Carrie, is about FHIR. Um, so that would be a institutional specific thing. FHIR is less about defining those things. So like if you're at a hospital A, if they want to use FHIR, they can use FHIR to represent those things. I mean, that actually doesn't make sense. What they would probably do is build it in their EHR, and it would be more of a EHR thing versus a FHIR thing. The moment FHIR becomes involved is more when you are building solutions to exchange information with someone else. So if you were to, let's say, share your order sets as a plan definition with another hospital, you can do so using FHIR, even though I don't even think that's a very common use case at all. But FHIR is more so a way of describing a standard way of exchanging information for things like what the order set looks like, all of the user experience stuff. That'll probably be more in this day and age defined in the EHR. We can all make without BPMN, only with Archimate. I feel like it's a very, I hear it's a very competitive landscape in this world where you're like representing those things. I feel like there's a lot of people who are hardcore fans of like BPMN. I'm probably one of them, and those that are not. But I'm not sure if there's like a clear winner in anything. Questionnaire is definition and works together with event questionnaire response. Yeah, that makes sense. I've never really considered a questionnaire as an event, or rather a definition resource, but I mean, it is a definition resource, and that makes sense. Let's see. So questionnaires differs from lists and lists group existing resources, while questionnaires group arbitrary questions. Questionnaires are distinct from observations and diagnostic reports in that both of these resources are intended to capture only certain types of information, labs, imaging, vitals, and should not be used to capture the full breadth of healthcare information, allergies, meds, care plans, while questionnaires are able to capture any information at all. More importantly, observation and diagnostic report focus on capturing the discrete information in a standardized form so that the information can be used consistently regardless of where or how it is captured. Questionnaire focuses on information capture. The same information can be captured using a wide variety of questionnaires with differently phrased questions organized in different manners. As such, the questionnaire resource provides a means to standardize the information gathering process, how information is captured, but not how data is interoperably compared, analyzed, or computed upon, typically managed using observation diagnostic report as well as other resources. Questionnaire supports data collection workflow to a limited extent in that once triggered, a questionnaire can guide a user through a data collection process that ensures appropriate information is collected based on answers to particular questions. It's basically branching. Like when you answer a question a certain way, you can basically branch to like a different set of questions. However, questionnaire doesn't provide support for capturing sets of information at different times or highly interactive data capture. Broader workflow is typically managed using plan definition and task or using other mechanisms such as CDS hooks. Questionnaires are similar to the notion of logical models, supported by the structure definition resource. Both support the representation of a collection of data points with labels, data types, and hierarchy. It will be common to find the two of them mapped together. The primary difference is that questionnaire is focused on user-facing data collection. It describes specific questions and includes information such as what number or label should be displayed beside each question, conditions in which questions should be displayed or not, what instructions should be provided to the user. Structure definition, on the other hand, merely defines a data structure with no guidance on display or rules around capture mechanism, only what data should exist in the end. As well, logical models are not intended to capture data directly. Rather, they provide a basis for mapping between data capture structures. Background and context. Groups and questions that make up a questionnaire can use the definition element to refer to data elements in external code systems and structured definitions. In this way, it's possible to leverage standard definitions of questions and their associated data types and answer sets across questionnaires. That is interesting, and I did not know this. And so the way I read this, the mental model here would be, let's say you're asking about what is your ethnicity? Instead of creating a FHIR questionnaire with that question, what is your ethnicity? And it would have its own like link ID, which is like the question code in this case. What you would do actually is, from what I read here, is you would define a definition, so a definition for that question, map it to there are common standards for OMB that ask that specific question, what is your ethnicity, to a specific code, and you would create a definition that uses the OMB code for that, and then that question can then be reused in any other questionnaire that you have for asking that specific question. It's just a way of scaling and reusing your questions. I didn't realize that that's what definition was used for. Where is it? Oh, here it is. So it's a data element. That's really cool. I did not know that. I've always thought like you would associate it with the code element, which I'm assuming you could do that too. But then in this case, you can define it here and reuse it. That's really cool. Got distracted for a bit. So this also allows extraction of the data from a questionnaire into other data structures, populating a service request or care plan from information in a completed questionnaire response. It can also support other sorts of post-processing of the data contained in a questionnaire response. However, use of the definition element is not required, and questionnaires may be quite loosely defined. The section Questionnaire versus Resources below discusses the issues of collecting data in such loosely defined questionnaires versus collecting data as well-defined separate resources. Questionnaire is good for anamnesis and patient state control modeling. I don't know what anamnesis means. German word that translates to reminisce or case history. Okay, I think it's slightly above my head, but thank you. Appreciate that comment. Let's keep going here. We have another resource for measure. The measure resource provides the definition of a quality measure. I'm sure our quality folks would enjoy this resource. The measure resource represents a structured, computable definition of a health-related measure such as a clinical quality measure, public health indicator, or population analytics measure. A quality measure is a quantitative tool to assess the performance of an individual or organization with respect to a specified process or outcome via the measurement of actions, processes, or outcomes of clinical care. Quality measures are often derived from clinical guidelines and are designed to determine whether the appropriate care has been provided given a set of clinical criteria and an evidence base. Note that the measure itself does not typically contain any logic. Rather, a library resource is referenced that contains the logic required by the measure and the various expression elements such as population criteria, reference named expressions within that library or libraries. In addition, if the measure references multiple libraries, then any expression references within the resource must be qualified with the name of the library that contains the reference expression. For detailed discussion of how to use the measure and measure report resources, refer to quality reporting topic. Boundaries and relationships. The measure resource describes a specific quality measure or population analytic, providing the structure of the measure in terms of the calculation elements, the populations involved. The group resource is also capable of describing a population. However, the complexity involved in specifying the criteria in the general use case requires the use of a high-level query language, such as clinical quality language or CQL. As such, the measure resource defines only the top-level populations and references expressions for the actual criteria. These expressions are typically provided using a library resource containing CQL or ELM expressions. In addition, the individual members of a population may be cases such as encounters or procedures. In these cases, the group resource would be unable to represent the population characteristics accurately. A measure is also very similar to an observation resource, with the exception that the measure is purely definitional. It contains no actual measurements, only a description of how to calculate a particular measurement or set of measurements. A measure is also similar to a clinical document, but as with relation to the observation, a document is specific to a particular subject. Okay, so this is like patient agnostic, this is patient specific, and so is a document. I'm trying to get an example of what this looks, what kind of data elements there are for this one. Name of the measure. Like top of mind, I'm thinking like measures like what is your rate of CAUTIs or CLABSIs, your rate of MRSA, things like this. Or let's see, you have a group, you have a population. I just want to, let's take a look at some examples. Breastfeeding measure, appropriate testing, alcohol misuse, screening for depression. Example of measure, public health. Let's see what they have here. So this is aggregate data exchange. Number of adults, so this is pretty specific. Number of adults and children newly enrolled on antiretroviral therapy in the reporting period. So can this define numerator and denominator? Newly enrolled. So it defines, so it gives you a description. Here's the population, newly enrolled. So the criteria, a stratifier, you have a specific code for it. Oh, this is multiple. Is this a library? Oh yeah. Oh no, this is the library. It's just a little bit hard to read. I feel like we could use a more simple one. Exclusive breastfeeding measure. True. Exclusive breastfeeding measure of outcomes for exclusive breast milk feeding of newborns. The purpose, measure of newborns who were fed breast milk only since birth. I see. Documentation. Rationale. So yeah, it's pretty specific then. If I go back up here, where was that description again? Here. Measure of newborns who were fed breast milk only since birth. So this could be something like percent of patients who received an antibiotic within the first hour for sepsis. And I assume then the rest of this measure explains stuff like, why do you do that? And based on the other thing, like how do you calculate it? So I assume here. So they probably define, looks like in this case, a denominator, and I assume, yeah, and a numerator, so then you can calculate it. That makes sense. I haven't really used measure resources, so this is like very new to me. Okay, cool. whoa, there's a lot of comments in the chat. Well, a lot of comments. Oh my goodness. Let's see. Let's go through some of these. I learned that many countries are using HL7. Yep, HL7 is an international standard. It's a very, very popular thing. HL7 version 2 and some of their other standards like CCDA. And why am I blanking on the other ones? HL7v2 though is widely used all over the world. It's a primary way of like how systems communicate, like hospital to hospital or hospital to like pharmacy. Like that's the main way of communicating in healthcare. Medical history. Okay, amnesis. It's a very cool word. So it's nice that Roman is sharing his. So it's nice. I think he meant patient case. Ukraine used not HL7 but FHIR. It's really cool to see wide adoption of FHIR, though I have to admit. Bars well with you and your family, Ukraine, Roman. Could we use FHIR with COVID epidemic? Yes, we certainly can. There's actually a lot of use cases defined for using FHIR with COVID, and I'll give a quick example. In the last, or rather specifically during the pandemic, it was pretty obvious that we had not the best public health information system, and we needed ways to quickly report stuff about COVID, right? So things like how many vaccines were given, how many ventilators do we have, how many COVID vaccines, how many COVID meds, all those things were needed to be reported to different state, local, and federal public health agencies. So FHIR was actually defined for a lot of those things to quickly exchange information. So you think about FHIR in terms of exchanging information. So there's a lot of use cases of FHIR that was used, especially during the pandemic, to quickly exchange information from different hospitals and clinics and pharmacies to different state, local, and federal health departments. So very popularly used, and it's a great use case. Carry food, farm D. I don't think I understand the comments, but maybe Carrie does. Maybe she doesn't. A preliminary. Oh, not. I see. That makes sense now. So it wasn't what I showed earlier. It's a case history. I think that's what you were showing. What data did we obtain, by the way, countries regarding long COVID? I'm actually not sure. I unfortunately didn't follow. I have, especially as of late, I have not been following a lot of the data around COVID. But in any case, yeah, I just don't know. So let's continue moving on. It is almost at the hour too, so I don't think I'm going to get through a lot of this. And I'm having a little bit of confusion on reading through some of this too, because like this just seems a bit overwhelming and I'm not sure which one to read. So I read through all these definition resources. We actually read through some of these already. Appointment response, we read through these. I didn't read through these. I feel like I'll end up seeing these resources elsewhere. So I might just skip the workflow module and I'm gonna come back. Actually, I should have started here. Let's read the task resource and then I'm probably gonna wrap it up for today. Let's do that. This one should be pretty straightforward. I think it's bad habit, or rather, it's not best practice to define something, the name of what you're trying to define in the definition. The task resource is a task to be performed. That should probably be elaborated on. Oh, I guess it doesn't need elaboration. That's a pretty straightforward thing anyways. So a task resource describes an activity that can be performed and tracks the state of completion of that activity. So it's a way of tracking the state of something, like not started, in progress, completed, something like that. It is a representation that an activity should be or has been initiated. It eventually represents the successful or unsuccessful completion of that activity. Note that there are a variety of processes associated with making and processing orders. Some orders may be handled immediately by automated systems, but most require real world actions by one or more humans. Some orders can only be processed when other real world actions happen, such as patients presenting themselves, so that the action to be performed can actually be performed. Often, these real world dependencies are only implicit in the order details. Using tasks in a RESTful context. In a RESTful context, a server functions as a repository of tasks. The server itself or other agents are expected to monitor task activity and initiate appropriate actions to ensure task completion, updating the status of the task as it proceeds through its various stages of completion. These agents can be coordinated following well-choreographed business logic to ensure that tasks are completed. Task management can also be centrally controlled using some form of a workflow engine, in which case the workflow engine itself may update and maintain the task resources in the server and through its orchestration activities, ensure that tasks are completed. The task resource enables either model or task management, yet provides a consistent view of the status of tasks being executed in support of healthcare workflows. The assignment of a task into categories by type of task, type of performer, and task status enable the server to function as a queue of work items. This queue can be pulled or subscribed to by various agents, enabling automation of workflows in FHIR using existing search and subscription mechanisms. Owners, requesters, or other agents, workflow managers, can thus be ready to initiate the next step in a complex workflow. It's actually a really long resource. Task state machine. Tasks start in a created state. Once they have been assigned to an owner, they transition to the ready state, indicating that they are ready to be performed. Once the owner initiates activity on that task, the task transitions to the in progress state, indicating that work is being performed. Upon normal completion, the task enters the completed state. If there is a failure during the task execution that prevents the task from being completed, it can also enter a failed state, indicating an abnormal termination of the task. A task in any non-terminal state may also be canceled, representing an abnormal termination of the task due to external forces rather than an error condition. Just because it's like pretty mundane. Like one way I think about this is some of the examples that Andrea was giving just the other day about, in a hospital, when someone has a suspected infection, you probably want to go out and collect cultures. So in the context of FHIR, you might have that request pattern where you request a culture to be ordered. So you have a service request. That service request would then have a task associated with it. And that task would represent things like you go out and collect the specimen, so the actual culture from the patient. So you have a tech that actually will get assigned. So then they'll be in a ready state when they are collecting it from the patient. It could be in an in progress state. And once the specimen's been collected, it'll be then marked in a perform state. But task is like generalizable to so many different requests in the FHIR world that you can use it in a lot of places. Let's continue. Where did I stop reading? Now I got a little confused. All right, so tasks in any non-terminal state, created, ready, in progress, can be suspended and resumed. When a task is suspended, it is typically resumed in the state it was in when it was originally suspended. Suspending a task suspends all of its children as well. Resuming a task resumes all of its children. I wonder if this could represent, as pharmacists, as a pharmacist, we all love the on hold medication on hold. So like if a patient had to be given a medication every day at 9 a.m., I wonder if this is like a concrete example of that, when you suspend a task, so you put a med on hold. Um, just kind of thinking out loud. I don't know if that's accurate, but that's my mental model of it. An in progress task can be stopped, returning it to a ready state. This may be in preparation for delegation or reassignment because it cannot be completed by the current owner. Well, that's kind of interesting. So a state can, if a task is in progress, can be stopped and you move it back to ready. To restart a task due to a temporary failure, to reattempt completion of an activity, or in preparation to allow others to claim the task. I'm like slightly confused because I would wonder, like, wouldn't you want to start a new task so you can at least, or maybe you capture the history though. So maybe you capture a history of, like, let's say you were trying to perform a procedure on a patient, it didn't work, so you try again. Procedure might be a little overkill here because you probably want to represent that with other things, but it probably captures the whole history of stuff, so that I think that makes sense. The task history allows applications monitoring the state of a workflow to identify tasks that are long-running, perhaps stuck in some queue, to enable management activities that could ensure completion. It also enables tracking of task statistics, such as wait time, or time in progress, or time to completion, enabling capture of important task metrics in support of optimization and quality improvement. Currently, task prerequisites can be represented using task description element or request group resource. We are seeking input from the implementer community and evaluating whether there is a need for adding another mechanism to this resource for this purpose. Hey, they talk about BPMN down here. I'll read this and I'm going to wrap it up. So task spans both intent and event and tracks the execution through the completion. A task is a workflow step such as canceling an order, fulfilling an order, signing an order, merging a set of records, admitting a patient. In contrast, procedures are actions that are intended to result in a physical or mental change to or for the subject. For example, surgery, physiotherapy training, counseling. A task resource often exists in parallel with clinical resources. For example, a task could request fulfillment of a service request, ordering a procedure that would result in a procedure, observation, diagnostic report, imaging study, or similar resource. Another example would be a task that requests fulfillment of a communication request to be performed between various actors. As stated above, the task resource tracks the state of a task, enabling systems to ensure that tasks are completed. This information is kept separate from the operational details necessary to complete the task, as those details vary across and even within workflows. That detail is expected to be carried in the reference focus of the task. Tasks may have named inputs and outputs. Inputs represent information that may or must be present in order for a task to complete. Outputs represent intermediate or final results produced by a task. For example, in a task supporting reading of a radiology image, the task might include both the imaging study to be read as well as relevant prior images. Okay. Outputs could represent radiology measurements as well as the radiologist's diagnostic report. Inputs and outputs are tracked by the tasks because workflow management activity may automate the transfer of outputs from one task to inputs to a subsequent task. To facilitate the integration of off-the-shelf workflow applications with FHIR, the task resource may reference a definition. This definition can represent a description of the workflow activity to be performed using a standard workflow description language such as BPL, BPMN, or XPDL, a workflow definition such as those defined in IHE profiles, or even simple written instructions explaining a process to be performed. I was reading a little slower because I sometimes struggle with what do you represent and when do you represent the inputs and outputs of a task? So I was just trying to internalize that a bit. I don't think I'm like completely clear on it, but I think it's like, if you're going to ask someone to, let's say, verify a medication, what are the inputs needed? You probably need like the medication, obviously, certain things like probably their labs, like serum creatinine, maybe their age, just different information. And the output in this case would be maybe you can say a Boolean, yes or no, should you verify that prescription? I think that makes sense, but I feel like there's probably so many different variations of how you can use this to represent inputs and outputs. Okay, I think that's it. Let me just go through the comments and then I'm probably gonna wrap it up for today. I don't even know why there are so many people in here right now because it's a Friday. I don't know if folks are just all studying for this exam as well, which that could be pretty cool. Carrie says it is overwhelming. Good luck. Thank you so much. I really hope I pass the exam. We shall see. Task is the event and request, and hi is archimate.technicallevel.event. It's really cool that like all of this stuff is mapped to this. I think you mentioned it earlier, like FHIR references a lot of the stuff from Archimate. That's very cool. That's kind of weird. Then you can skip the task. Wouldn't that backlog more tasks, or users can pick and choose? I don't remember what this was in reference to, but you can definitely implement task in a very strange way because like I can't really explain it that well. It's this though. Like how does things progress from like a created to a in progress to completed? But you can like technically move around in these states. It's not like a straight path all the time. You can go like, let's say, use a quick example. If you're in a hospital and a patient is getting a catheter inserted, let's say the nurse went in there and needed to go insert a catheter. So they're in progress of doing that task. But because the nurse may be taking care of like 12 different patients and another patient is seizing, her responsibility of taking care of the patient that's seizing probably takes priority of inserting a catheter. So that task could be maybe suspended. Maybe it could be moved back to ready and she goes and does something else. So another nurse, or later on, she comes back and resumes the task. So like these kind of states, I feel can get very complicated, but that's what, this whole section is supposed to like represent. Task is interconnection between FHIR and computer execution. That makes sense. That's a really nice, succinct way to put it too. This is an interesting comment. I just defeated a Terran with a lot of Archon and Zealot, and he threatened to find me in reality and beat me up. So what should I do now? Any good suggestions? I'm gold, he is platinum. The best answer is to go Dark Templars, and just wipe out his army with that. That is always my answer as Protoss. All right, guys. Thanks for watching. I'm gonna again not live stream tomorrow. I'll probably be just studying all weekend just to go through all the resources. Best of luck to anyone else that is studying for the exam. I know I got a couple of messages about people who are planning on taking the different exams. Best of luck to you guys who are studying. And thanks for sending a lot of advice my way and wishing me luck. But anyways, I'm going to wrap this up. Hopefully in 2024, I'll actually create some resources to teach this versus just live streaming the study sessions. I'll spend more time creating resources that are succinct and easy to learn. But thanks for watching, guys. I'm going to end the live stream, and I will see you